Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
No Conservative politicians or officials will face charges for breaches of expenses rules during the 2015 general election. It follows allegations that the party had underestimated the amount it spent in local constituencies. The Crown Prosecution Service said it had examined files from 14 police forces in England, but had not found enough evidence to justify further action. Our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons reports.
I'm on the bus.
I'm on the bus.
I'm on the bus.
The last general election. Conservative activists tour the country by battle bus, staying in a string of hotels as they campaign for local candidates. Party officials declared the cost of this as national election expenses, not local. And political rivals said the law had been broken. But today, prosecutors decided there was no case to answer.
After full and lengthy investigation, the legal authorities have confirmed what we believed all along and what we said all along, which was that the expenses, that local spending was properly reported, was properly declared, and that the candidates had done nothing wrong.
Prosecutors said today that under the relevant law, it must be proved that a suspect, that's the local official putting in the declaration, knew the return was inaccurate and acted dishonestly in signing the declaration. But in this case, the local officials said they'd been told what to do by the National Party, which received a record penalty fine from the Electoral Commission. Greg Kinsell and his partner Louise were also on the bus, supporting a string of Conservative candidates. But they went to the police about how the campaign was run. Their response to today's news?
I think this is absolutely disgusting. It's a cover-up on a huge level. And I think that the Electoral Commission are involved in it, and I think the CPS and the government, and I think it's all to deflect attention from what really goes on behind the scenes.
Other parties have also been fined for the way they filed election expenses. This time the justice system has concluded there's evidence of inaccuracies, but not of a deliberate attempt to deceive. But that's not it, because there's still a police investigation into one official going on in London. And prosecutors are examining files of 2015 campaign spending in South Thanet in eastern Kent. The candidate then, as now, Craig McKinley. Tomorrow is the last day on which he could be replaced on the ballot. But he won't hear about any prosecution by then. So the Conservatives are going to have to push ahead with him as their candidate, no doubt holding their breaths.
Tom, thank you very much.
Theresa May hailed today's decision not to bring criminal charges over Conservative election expenses in the 2015 election as proof that candidates did nothing wrong. Prosecutors said candidates and officials may have submitted inaccurate spending returns, but there wasn't enough evidence of dishonesty. Let's get more now from our political correspondent, Libby Vina.
It was the battle bus campaign bringing activists into key marginals, which many thought swung the 2015 election. So the issue of whether Tory MPs had spent more than they should locally was potentially explosive. Today's decision that there should be no charges, welcomed by the Prime Minister.
The CPS has decided, they're an independent body, they have decided that no charges will be brought against any candidate in relation to this matter. Candidates did nothing wrong. This is very important. I repeat that. I've said it now several times. Candidates did nothing wrong.
But the CPS didn't quite come to that conclusion, saying although there is evidence to suggest the returns may have been inaccurate, there is insufficient evidence to prove to the criminal standard that any candidate or agent was dishonest. Among those cleared today, Carl McCartney. He claims Tory candidates had been unfairly singled out.
Nobody willfully tried to disguise anything. We all obviously made the most about the fact that we had campaign buses coming to our constituency. Nobody has a problem with that. But if the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats do something and the Conservatives do it in exactly the same way, why is it then fair that only the Conservatives, who happen to be the party that are in government, find that then they have their members of Parliament under investigation?
But Labour said the Electoral Commission's findings should be respected.
I think all of us as elected politicians, should accept and respect the independence of all those legal authorities as well as the Electoral Commission and move on.
There was no doubt huge relief here at party headquarters at the CPS's decision, but the robust response of the party chairman today, suggesting that the entire police investigation had been a waste of time, conveniently ignores the fact that nationally the party has already been fined a record £70,000 for failing to report its expenses accurately. Police are also still investigating election expenses in relation to South Thanet, where Nigel Farage was defeated. But the Tories now no longer need to worry about any charges relating to the battle bus campaign ahead of this general election. Libby Vina, ITV News, Westminster.
So, no Conservative MPs will now face criminal charges in connection with election spending rules over the 2015 battle bus campaign, after the Crown Prosecution Service said it was not in the public interest. The CPS said that though there is evidence to suggest the returns may have been inaccurate, there was not enough evidence to prove that any of the individual candidates had been dishonest. Tonight, this programme has learned a live criminal investigation is now underway into whether the spending return submitted by the party's then Treasurer was complete and correct. And no decision yet over allegations in South Thanet, where UKIP's Nigel Farage was defeated in a controversial campaign. Our political correspondent Michael Crick has more.
I'm on the bus.
I'm on the bus.
I'm on the bus.
I'm on the bus.
It was the 2015 Conservative Battle Bus project, ferrying activists around the country, that's been the subject of investigation by at least 14 police forces. That campaign cost the party more than £100,000, but none of that spending appeared on candidates' legal spending returns, as the law suggests it should. Today, the CPS decided against charges and said there was
insufficient evidence to prove to the criminal standard that any candidate or agent was dishonest.
Although the CPS says that
by omitting any battle bus costs, the returns may have been inaccurate.
That's not enough to prosecute because the CPS says
it is clear agents were told by Conservative Party headquarters that the costs were part of the national campaign, and it would not be possible to prove any agent acted knowingly or dishonestly.
Theresa May, flanked by loyal candidates again today, was in Nottingham.
The Prime Minister, Theresa May.
Introduced by the contender for Newark, whose own by-election campaign 3 years ago was one where this programme and the Electoral Commission found thousands of pounds of undeclared hotel bills. Mrs May said this.
We have always reported expenses according to the rules. What the CPS found very clearly in those cases that they looked at in local constituencies was that the local spending had been properly recorded, the candidates had done nothing wrong. There was an error made in our national return for the 2015 general election. That was, and the Electoral Commission fined us for that, and we have paid that fine. Other parties were also fined for errors that were made in their 2015 election expenses. And as I say, I hope they have paid their fines too.
What the CPS actually said is there is evidence to suggest that the local candidates' returns may have been inaccurate. So it's not right to say that all local returns were correctly filled out. Will you apologise for that? Because it might mean that some local candidates breached their spending limits at the last election.
No. What the CPS has decided, they're an independent body, they have decided that no charges will be brought against any candidate in relation to this matter. Candidates did nothing wrong.
The Conservative Party chairman, Patrick McLaughlin, was even stronger. We are pleased that the legal authorities have confirmed that these Conservative candidates did nothing wrong, he said. These were politically motivated and unfounded complaints that have wasted police time. But Mr McLaughlin said that the election rules should be strengthened to safeguard integrity. Yet it was the Electoral Commission, the government body which oversees elections, which really brought in the police. And today, Carl McCartney, spokesman for the Conservatives who were investigated, said Commission chiefs should now resign, or he'd organise a campaign to abolish the Commission if the Tories return to power. This story all flows from this programme's work last year, showing the Tories had used a fleet of battle buses to ferry activists to campaign for individual candidates in at least 29 marginal seats. And the activists were put up overnight in hotels at huge expense. But none of these battle bus costs were declared in the candidates' local spending returns, even though the battle bus project was to get them elected. Had they been included, most of the candidates would have exceeded their legal spending limits. But today's CPS decision is all about whether candidates and agents knowingly submitted wrong returns.
We had a note from the party centrally that this is part of the national campaign. It wasn't part of the local campaign at all. We didn't deliver any leaflets about me or anything like that at all, and so therefore I did exactly what we were told to do. And I have no doubt at all that we submitted a very thorough and up-to-date reflection of the amount of money that was spent during the course of the election campaign.
To a layperson, you can see the gap in the law that the candidate or the agent can say, I relied in good faith in what I was told by the National Party. The National Party can say, we accept, we told them that, but we're not legally liable for this candidate's election return. There's no criminal offence for that individual return that can be charged against us. And it's quite possible the advice they're giving is wrong about whether it should be returned. And the Electoral Commission's report suggests that in a number of these cases it frankly was wrong, but everybody walks away.
My colleague Jane Death caught up with Anna Soubry, another of the 30 or more Tories investigated, to ask her about the CPS decision.
But the CPS and the Electoral Commission say there was evidence that suggests the returns were inaccurate.
I think you should be very careful about what you say, because it is absolutely the case that nobody's done anything wrong, and certainly nothing criminally wrong. That's what you need to report. I'm afraid your reports have been wholly inaccurate. What you should be doing is apologising to people who've done nothing wrong at all. For many people, this has been very distressful.
Jeremy Corbyn was angry too.
Our election laws must be enforced and must be adhered to. There are strict spending limits for a reason, so that money can't buy power. Only votes in the ballot box should be able to get power, and that's why I want you all to register to vote.
And the story's not over. The CPS has yet to decide one big case.
18,838.
Craig McKinley's campaign to defeat Nigel Farage in South Thanet, where the Tories spent £14,000 on just one hotel for party campaign organisers, who included Nick Timothy. Mr. Timothy. Now Theresa May's Joint Chief of Staff in number 10. And the Met are still investigating national spending returns submitted by Conservative Party Treasurer Simon Day. The whole story seems to have made all parties much more careful. There's no sign in this campaign of parties ferrying activists round in battle buses and putting them up in hotels. At least, not so far.
Well, in a minute, we will speak to one of the Conservative MPs who was under investigation but has today been cleared, Neil Carmichael. But first, joining us from Aberdeen is the former leader of the SNP, Alex Salmond. And Alex Salmond, it is a truism, actually, that all the parties have been up to this at some point or another, and all have had to pay fines.
Well, no, it's not, actually. I heard the Prime Minister today say all the other parties, major parties, and the Scottish Nationalists have had to pay fines. The SNP have never been fined by the Electoral Commission. So
well,
no
you
doubt
were fined by another body, which were for the Information Commission had you over a barrel for this robo-calling.
John, in fairness, we've never been fined by the Electoral Commission, as was suggested by the Prime Minister today, and she should stop tarring other parties with her own disreputable brush and apologise to the SNP for that slight. But I do think you're right in saying that the other parties, Labour and Liberal, probably soft-pedalled in this issue because they've had recent fines about the 2015 election as well. And basically what's happened is the astonishing situation that the Conservative Party has driven a coach and horses, or perhaps a bus and horses, through the spending limits, and nobody, thus far at least, is to be held criminally responsible.
But the truth of the
an
matter
astonishing and a disgraceful situation.
But the truth of the matter is, Alex Salmond, you've been in the Commons in total for a quarter of a century, or 1 year short of quarter of a century, and nothing in that time has ever been done, actually, to sort this crummy system out.
Well, I think maybe it's time for a change then. And rather than abolish the Electoral Commission, as one of the aggrieved Tories wants to do, perhaps it should be strengthened. I mean, the fine on the Tories of £70,000, which is a flea bite for an organisation as rich as the Conservative Party, is clearly inadequate when there's such a
Well, how much should they have
breach.
been fined? I mean,
well, they should at least have been fined the amount that was missing from the returns, which was hundreds of thousands of pounds. It should be made to be significant. And secondly, of course, there has to be clarification. Most people in politics don't actually mind the battle buses. That's always been regarded as something that happens. It's the accommodation. Most people in politics have always felt and believed that if people were accommodated, paid for hotels, the party paying for their hotels in a particular constituency, that would go in the candidate's returns.
But in the end,
we've had this. We had this special defence today. You know, the candidates and agents say, look, it wasn't us, it was Central Office. And Central Office say, well, that may be, but we're not legally responsible, they are. And so you get this Mexican standoff, which has resulted in this quite disgraceful position today.
But the fundamentals, really, nationally, are that in many cases, a lot of parties simply do not have enough members to staff a proper campaign. And that's why you have to bus people about to fight a campaign.
Yeah, but I mean, well, they should get more members then, shouldn't they? But you know, it's the hotel bills that are the key to this. That as long as I've been in politics, and you helpfully reminded me how long that was, it's always been thought if you pay for accommodation, if the party pays for accommodation in a particular constituency to assist that constituency campaign, that's something that's part of the constituency return. And I'm totally puzzled as to why that has not been clear to people. That's certainly always been accepted knowledge.
Well, a quick question. Will you, when you return to Parliament, if you return to Parliament, will you be raising this matter and getting this sorted out? That there should be a proper, conceivably, the Electoral Commission itself should be strengthened and more money should be spent on policing this operation?
Yes, I will. We've got a situation where David Cameron effectively and his campaign team effectively bought the last election by campaigning in key constituencies. And we now have a position where the current Prime Minister, instead of apologising for what clearly, in terms of Tory central office, was a grievous thing to do, has reappointed the leading campaigners who were responsible in the last election for driving that coach and horses through the electoral regulations.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Cathy.
Well, Neil Carmichael, who is one of those who was under investigation but cleared today, joins me live now from Gloucestershire. Mr. Carmichael, are you relieved or are you concerned that the CPS says that returns may have been inaccurate?
Well, I think that I didn't do anything wrong, nor did my colleagues, who are also proved not to have been doing anything wrong, and that's very good news. What I do think is that we need to update our election procedures and the way in which we assess what's going on in the constituencies.
But you say you didn't do anything wrong, but CCHQ advised MPs such as yourself that a visit from the battle bus wouldn't count towards the local spending return. And that was a big error, wasn't it?
Well, that was certainly my understanding. We got a message from CCHQ saying exactly that, and when the bus came, it operated in a way which was consistent with that advice. Certainly we didn't have any sort of leaflets about me specifically on that bus, or distributed by people who came on the bus and so on. So it all sort of tied in with what was expected.
But you were badly let down by CCHQ then, weren't you? I mean, you've paid the price for that. It must have been very stressful.
Well, I've never had any doubts about my election return. I was always very clear about what I decided and who I decided it with and the advice that I had got, so I had nothing really to worry about. And I think that that's the point. What I was told was what I did, and what I did was what was consistent with my understanding of the election law. So what I'd say is that given the changes in elections these days, we should actually make some changes to the procedures and the law.
Well, we've just heard from Alex Salmond, the former SNP leader, who says that David Cameron bought the last election. What do you say to that?
I say that we won the last election because we had a very clear set of policies about governing Britain, and we were able to demonstrate that the Labour Party in particular was not likely to form a government of any usefulness to this country's national interest. And that's actually the same sense of issues that are on the table this election.
Well, I'll come back to this election.
I'll
come back to this election in a minute, but
okay.
I mean, do you go along with the assessment of your party chairman that this was a politically motivated campaign, or do you think that the Electoral Commission was justifiably doing its job?
Well, I think the Electoral Commission does need to be independent, and I would think that it needs to think very much about how it's come over during the last year or so. I think it's very important, too, to recognise that all of us have a duty to be transparent and clear. And to my mind, that's how we should frame the way in which elections are conducted in the future.
So are you calling for the resignation of the Electoral Commission Chief Executive, as some of your colleagues are?
No, I'm not criticising the individual in particular. I'm not really saying that the Electoral Commission has gone beyond what it should do, because it's still got some decisions to make anyway, and I think we should respect that fact.
Neil Carmichael, I'll come back to you in a few moments to talk about schools funding, but thank you very much for joining us for now.
One potential threat hanging over the Conservative election campaign was that of possible prosecutions for breaches of election law in 2014 and 2015. This is all to do with the party spending national money on local campaigns and counting it in the wrong box in order to override rules about how much can be spent. Well, today that threat almost went away. 15 police forces looking at multiple constituencies reported to the Crown Prosecution Service, and in 14 of those, no further action is to be taken. However, it's not a get-out-of-jail-free card for the Tory campaign. In one prominent case, a decision is still to come. Chris Cook reports.
The Conservative Party has already been in trouble over its election expenses from 2015. Tory HQ has paid a £70,000 fine for misreported spending in dozens of constituencies, the result of an exhaustive Channel 4 news investigation. But that fine may be it. The Crown Prosecution Service said today that it was now only considering criminal charges relating to overspending at the election in one constituency.
There was an error made in our national return for the 2015 general election. That was, and the Electoral Commission fined us for that, and we have paid that fine.
The cases dropped today relate to a battle bus campaign, which took Tory activists and shipped them into target seats. Now, what these cases actually really demonstrate is a real oddity in our election law. Specifically, there would have been no investigation at all and no problems at all had those Tory activists simply handed out leaflets that only mentioned David Cameron and the Conservative Party at large. The problem was that, and I quote the Electoral Commission, they found social media posts where activists from the coaches were holding campaign material promoting individual candidates. The reason they drew that distinction is that our law distinguishes between national spending, promoting parties, and local election spending, promoting candidates. Take two activists for a party who both want their man, Joe Bloggs, to win in Poppleton North. Let's say both get on a bus paid for by the party on the same day at the same cost, and both go leafleting to help Mr. Bloggs. Let's say, by the luck of the draw, one of them gets a bundle of leaflets that praise local man Joe Bloggs, and the other gets leaflets that only mention the party leader and national policies. The activist delivering the local Joe Bloggs leaflet will count as local spending, but the activist delivering the national leaflet will count as national or party spending. Never mind the fact that a vote for the national party in this seat would be a vote for Joe Bloggs.
In Victorian times, an MP was simply returned for his constituency without regard to any party label whatsoever. And the parties were not creatures really recognised by the law. They were certainly not controlled by the law. More recently, that is to say within the last 20 years, we've had a system which has recognised political parties and sought to control party expenditure. Hence, we've got one system left over from Victorian times for individual MPs and one system recently introduced for national expenses, for national campaigns, for now recognised political parties.
The case whose fate is yet to be decided, though, South Thanet in Kent, is the most serious. And it's not about activists handing out the wrong leaflets. It's about one party using its spending superiority to overwhelm another one. It's precisely the sort of activity that these rules are supposed to prevent. This case is also high profile because Nick Timothy, now the Prime Minister's co-chief of staff, ran that campaign. The CPS might not prosecute, though, for the same reason they declined to prosecute the other cases. They have to prove the local MP or agent broke their spending limits deliberately, not by accident, because Tory Central Office gave candidates duff advice about receipts. The law draws quite odd lines, and prosecution is difficult.
Chris Cook reporting there.
I've been getting away